Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. Now this is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. I'm Peter Ndoro. This is what's coming up on the show. We'll be taking a look at how the youth consume news, particularly in this digital era. This past week, the National Press Club announced its top newsmaker for 2019. Find out who that was when we speak to the Press Club's chairperson. And as usual, we take a look back in history, and this week's feature takes us back to 1997, when a group of former security policemen made some startling confessions about crimes that they committed during the apartheid era. Remember, you can always engage with us on social media, and the handle to use is hashtag SABC Media Monitor. Hashtag SABC Media Monitor. Now, before we unpack these stories, let's first take a look at what's on the front pages of your Sunday newspapers this morning. And we start with the Sunday Times, which is leading with a story that says that the ANC is proposing a dramatic change to a constitutional amendment allowing expropriation of land without compensation to exclude the courts. Well, law experts are warning that this could be both unprecedented and unworkable, that all power is given to the Minister of Land Reform instead of the courts. The City Press, well, that's leading with a story that alleges that Social Development Deputy Minister Henrietta Zulu has abused her ministry travel allowance, organising trips to facilitate the wedding plans of her niece and a clerk in her office. The Sunday Independent has the Public Protector Busisiwe Mkhwebane on the front page with a story that the tax authorities have launched an investigation into her income tax affairs going back as far as 2011. The Hawks apparently have requested a warning statement as well relating to a perjury case. The Weekend Argus on Sunday is also running the SARS story, with the Public Protector saying that the investigation into her is a lynching process which forms part of concerted efforts to instill fear in her following some of her investigations. And finally, the Sunday World is reporting about a crisis in top-flight football in South Africa, as Absa Bank is said to be cancelling its sponsorship deal with the Premier Soccer League. All right, there's so much to get through on the show this morning, and helping us make sense of these stories are my guest editors, and they're young guest editors for a change. Siyabonga Muta, who's a journalist at the Voice of Wits Radio, and Mandlekosi Ubisi, a third-year journalism student at the Tshwane University of Technology, who also writes for the Pretoria Record Noeto, which is a local community newspaper that circulates around Pretoria. Gentlemen, good morning. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. All right, so that's our guest editors who'll be chatting to us in a short while. Now, we begin with this. This past week, the High Court in Johannesburg delivered its judgment in a case against the EFF. The court ordered the party to apologize to SABC journalist Thandeka Mbeki and the founder of the Weekly Mail, later the Weekly Mail and Guardian, and also adjunct professor of journalism at the University of the Witwatersrand, Anton Harbour. The party was found guilty of making defamatory statements about the pair being apartheid-era Stratcom spies. Thandeka Mbeki gave us her reaction.
The court has been on our side, and we have been thoroughly vindicated in that they have been told that those statements are false, untrue, defamatory, and thoroughly unlawful. Now, we also wanted to put pressure on people who do these kind of things, people with totalitarian mindsets who want to shut down journalists. We wanted to give them pause, and we needed to give them pause to reflect by hitting them in the pocket.
Well, Mbeki also spoke about the impacts that the defamatory statements made by the EFF had on her personally.
Other thing that was a real insult to me in particular, I have worked tirelessly for the liberation of this country since a very young age. And it implied that all those people that I had worked with in the student movement, in the young youth movements, in the Christian youth movements, as well as in as a courier in the underground, those people had been betrayed by me. It is an insult that I would never be able to take. And so I wished to expunge the stink and the stench that they sought to create. But, you know, it is an attempt, it's the politics of destruction. And those politics are essentially doomed in a democracy.
All right, that was Thandeka Gqubule-Mbeki speaking to us earlier in the week. Well, the other person that was defamed by the EFF in that judgment is adjunct professor of journalism at the University of the Witwatersrand, Anton Harber. He was also the founding editor of the Weekly Mail, later known as the Mail and Guardian. He joins us now to take and share with us his thoughts about this case and this judgment. Prof, thanks so much indeed for joining us. I guess relief might be one of the emotions that you felt, but your thoughts when this judgment was handed down?
I was very pleased because, as Thandeka has said, we were vindicated. There was no basis, no evidence, no reason to make those allegations, and I'm very glad that it made it absolutely clear that it's, as she says, defamatory and unlawful, and that they should not.
All right, I guess in the age of fake news and misinformation, reputation is the license that journalists have to work. And this really was what was at risk with this case.
Well, our reputation is always important to us. But particularly when these ridiculous accusations can be spread like wildfire, it's very hard to undo. But I think the important thing is that we have to say, you know, we want a proper and a decent political discourse in the country. We don't want it to be name-calling and insulting and defamation. And we've got to take a stand for proper, useful, decent political discourse, not abuse.
Do you have any idea, have you been able to find out why the EFF came at you in this way?
I can't account for what drives the EFF. You'd have to ask them that.
What are the wider implications for this judgment for journalism and journalists in general?
Oh, I think it's important because we've seen of this kind, and particularly, let me say, against women journalists, gender-based attacks. I think the courts are backing us in saying journalists must be allowed to do their work unhindered, threatened, because that's important to our society and to democracy. So I see this victory as one journalists protecting space, their right and their capacity to do that.
All right, Prof, we're going to have to keep it short because the line's not holding very well, but thanks very much indeed for sharing your thoughts with us on this morning. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so that was Professor Anton Harber, who's very pleased, of course, with the judgment, saying that it actually is quite important for not just him and Thandeka Gqubule-Mbeki, but journalism in general going forward. Stay with us, we'll have much more for you right here on Media Monitor. Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Now, this past Friday, Eskom was named as the 2019 National Press Club's Newsmaker of the Year. The annual award, Newsmaker, in a calendar year based on the amount of media coverage that it received. Well, according to the National Press Club, the Newsmaker Award is neither an accolade or a criticism. It just represents the dominant themes of the 2019 news cycle. Well, we're joined now in our Pretoria studios by the National Press Club chairperson, Ndoro Magubu. Thanks so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
All right, so was Eskom an easy choice, or was it quite close in the end?
Look, it wasn't an easy choice. Coming up with Eskom as the newsmaker was extremely difficult, but it had to be Eskom of all the nominations that we got here.
So take us through the process of coming up with a newsmaker.
Okay, so we ask our membership to come up with what issues they feel dominated the media space, what issues were reported on, what issues made an impact on what they feel made news, and then the executive committee then sits down, goes through them. And then after a very difficult process and hours of back and forth, the newsmaker then emerges.
All right, so it's interesting that you've chosen a corporation, so I suppose it doesn't matter whether you're a human being or it is the entity, whether it's a human or whatever it is, that then gets recognized because it is generating news.
Yes, that's right. It's what makes what makes an impact on people's lives. Yeah.
All right. So we've seen similar awards around the world, and I just wonder, why do we do it?
Why we came up with Eskom?
Yeah. No. Why we come up with the award itself?
Okay, we come up with the award because, look, the media remains a very relevant aspect of people's lives. And we want to believe that people follow the news in whatever way and form, be it in print media, be it in electronic media. And we believe that the work of journalists has an impact on people's lives. So, the more journalists go out there and get the news, the more impact what happens in and around the country, has on people's lives.
All right.
So that's why we come up with that. Yeah.
I mean, I'm almost getting clues to the answer to my next question is, what was it about Eskom in the end that sort of tipped the scale for Eskom?
What tipped the scales in Eskom's favor, so to speak, was basically, the power struggles within Eskom, the fact that, there was speculation of political interference. There was issues of high-level resignations, and of course the blackouts.
Yeah.
The blackouts were probably the biggest effect. 1 minute we were told that there were going to be no blackouts. The next minute there were blackouts. The failure of Eskom to commit to a strategy that would work for the entity itself and obviously for provision of service to the people.
And I would imagine, unlike many of the other SOEs that were in trouble last year, this one affects every single South African one way or another. And that probably, when you talk about affecting society, no one does it more than Eskom.
That's right.
Yeah.
It affects everybody. Business, the ordinary person, a person in the rural areas, a person in the urban areas, ourselves. We're all touched one way or the other by Eskom.
All right, we're calling it an award, but you're also careful to note that this isn't praise or criticism, it's just a statement of fact. Who else was in the running for this recognition?
Okay. Yes, definitely. It's not. Yeah. We're giving no one any sort of, praise as such. So what also made it into the news last year was the Springboks, was Siya Kolisi, and this is based on nominations, was the Zondo Commission, state capture, a gentleman called B. Pagati. Those were the main ones, but I think the closest contender was definitely the Springboks, and Siya Kolisi and Erasmus. Those were the closest contenders to the ESCOM.
Wow, now that you mention it, I mean, I just remember the outpouring of emotion. But I suppose what it is that ESCOM was throughout the year, and the Springbok story was really probably about two weeks at the most.
Yes. It made massive media impact, but the period was shorter than ESCOM. ESCOM, right up until now, still makes impact on our lives.
Who's won this award as well in previous years?
We've had President Nelson Mandela, former President Nelson Mandela, former President Thabo Mbeki, former President Jacob Zuma. We've had the Fees Must Fall movement. We've held the Gupta leaks. We've held numerous people, and entities and sort of movements that made an impact on people's lives.
So here's a question for you. Media has changed in the way that we look at it now. A lot of people spend most of their time on social media, and you'll find that a lot of stories might trend and have an impact there much more than some of these stories that we've been discussing. Is this something that the Press Club's going to have to think about in the future?
Well, you know what? Social media is definitely the biggest thing that is happening to the news right now, but which is probably why a lot of our membership, which include electronic and print media people, are also on the platform of social media. So to sort of balance the scales. You still have a large community of people that still wants to read the newspapers. You still have a large community of people that wants to hold a newspaper in their hand. But everybody has crossed over so that they have both the traditional and the new, sort of media platform to spread news.
All right, and then perhaps remind us again, because you've been in existence a long time now, the Press Club. Why do you exist? Who's in it? And what do you try and do?
The Press Club, it's the biggest body that gets together journalists in the country. And we exist basically to give a platform for journalists to network. And our membership also involves PR people, and we also facilitate a relationship between newsmakers and journalists. So if a newsmaker has something to say, they come to us, we give them access to journalists, and vice versa, so that everybody has access to the other.
Okay.
Sometimes it's difficult for the one to get access to the other, so we are there to make sure that there's a smooth relationship between the newsmakers and the journalists and the newsmakers.
All right. And Ntando Makubu, thanks so much indeed, the chairperson of the National Press Club, telling us why ESCOM was voted the Newsmaker of 2019. Thanks so much indeed for your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. That's the chairperson of the National Press Club. So now let's chat to our guest editors, who are the future of journalism. They're busy finishing their studies, and get a sense from you guys. Gents, thanks so much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having us.
All right, let me start with you. Your thoughts about ESCOM being the Newsmaker of the Year? You heard the chairperson explain why. Your thoughts, do you think it was a good choice?
For me, Peter, I think it was a good choice. Why am I saying this? It's simply because I'll make reference to unemployment, specifically youth unemployment. with these power cuts, some of the companies have been affected, which might result in some of the companies retrenching their staffs.
Yeah.
So for me, I think that's what
All right.
makes it a good
So,
choice.
as a young person in particular, as adults, we follow news slightly differently. We're going to discuss that in a short while after the break. But ESCOM, did that stand out for you as well?
No, I completely disagree with the press club.
Yeah.
I think the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture made headlines a lot last year. I mean, even now, if you were to go to your any news publication, there's a story in a way that's linked to the state capture, into the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture. So I think ESCOM could be, I don't think, number 2, number 3. But
Yeah.
I'll also look into unemployment as my colleague
Big
has.
issue.
Yes, said. Well, ESCOM, it did top the news.
Yeah.
But if you look at the Commission of Inquiry, it is one topic, I would say, in the country has opened quite a lot of things. ESCOM is involved. SA is involved. Quite a lot of things. Even the SABC is involved when it comes to the state capture. So I think for me, it's the one that topped. I don't think ESCOM was number 1.
All right, so after the break, we're going to talk about how young people consume news. But what I'm curious about now is, what do you think young people generally would have thought was the top story last year? Well, we're talking now, because you guys are journalists in training, so you're probably thinking slightly differently, but people on campus, what was their top story, do you think? How did they experience it?
As for people on campus, I'd like to choose SAA.
Yeah.
Why am I choosing SAA? It's simply because if we are to check later last year during the year, around November, SAA was in a strike battling to have finance to pay their employers. And if you are to check this year again, still that's the very same problem.
I think you're thinking like us journalists now. Because I look at social media and what's trending there is Bonang, Boiti, and I just wonder, are they not the newsmakers for young people if they're generating so much traffic on social media?
I think as a country we've made it a point that, I don't know, we've drawn this picture that young people shouldn't be interested in politics, shouldn't be interested in government. So for that reason, I think a lot of young people don't actually care on what's happening with the SOEs, the government and whatnot. They just focus more on what's happening on Twitter, on Instagram. I think for me, what I would say made news for them last year, I think most young people were talking about the Rugby World Cup. I think for me, young people were focused more on that. There are those who were, of course, focusing in
but
other...
that was only for 2 weeks. What were they talking about the rest of the year?
But throughout the duration of the World Cup, that is what...
Still, it's only 4 weeks. There's 52 in the year. What else was capturing their imagination? And every day, I promise you, I look at social media and I feel like I'm in another world altogether.
Yes.
What else was capturing their imagination?
I can say ESCOM again, simply because ESCOM might have implemented a lot of state load shedding last year. We come at a stage whereby ESCOM has implemented stage 6, and that for me it's a very huge thing. And it
so
has never
Fees Must Fall
before.
is off the radar completely now.
For me, Fees Must Fall was just like, it has now been used by political parties as a campaigning tool. It's no longer one thing that's on every young person's mouth now, or mind, I must put it like that. I think it has been just used as a political thing enough for political parties. It's just out. But I think it's going to come back now because most students will be going back to varsity in the next coming few weeks. So I think maybe we might start talking about it again.
So, I mean, you are journalists and you're writing for your various newspapers and radio stations. What are they wanting to hear more of? Which stories?
For me, as record narrator, focus on stories around the community. People want to hear stories that have an impact on the community, what's happening in the community. So those are some of the stories.
And that's everyday issues, inflation, cost of bread, unemployment.
Yes.
And at Wits, what's happening? What are people wanting to hear from you when you go on radio?
For me, I would say most of the time it's music on radio. But also what's happening in the university, at Wits and its surroundings, and also check on what's trending on social media. I think that's what I've came across when I walk around campus, where I say I'm doing Voxies. That there's certain questions that I would ask in deep issues in the country. some young people are not actually clued up on what I'm asking. For an example, I made an example with, like, last year we were talking about Tom Moyane, and people were asking me, who's Tom Moyane, you know. And for me, I think some of the responses I got from those young people really indicated to me that there's actually a gap between those, what we call, I would say, serious issues and what's happening on social media.
All right, gents, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll start talking about how young people are consuming news, if they are at all. Stay with us. You're watching Media Monitor, and there's still lots more to come. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor. Now, younger news consumers are different from us older folk, and not just in the way that they do things, but in their attitudes and terms of what they want from the news. Now, according to a study by Reuters Institute, young people are primarily driven by progress and enjoyment in their lives, and this translates into what they look for in news as well. So anyway, we took to the streets to hear the views of young people about the kind of news that they consume.
I happen to find reading news on my cell phone more convenient than reading news in newspapers, because my cell phone is constantly updating new information on a daily basis or even hourly basis, as compared to newspapers that only update information on a daily basis. I happen to find information that I find in newspapers a bit old news as compared to news that I find on my social media platforms, my news apps that I have on my cell phone. So that is just more convenient for me, because I can easily access information at any point in time as compared to newspapers. It's even cost effective using my cell phone as compared to buying a newspaper every single day.
I get my news from SABC's website. I get my sports news on a SuperSport website. I also get my sports news on ENCA. So, well, it's a very nice program. And of course, I always get updated information there. Thanks.
I prefer using the net to watch, to get the news, because of it's convenient and it's accessible, because of I always have my phone with me. And for TV, I prefer using TV to watch the news, like at night, especially after work, because that's when I get to watch the TV and watch news and get to know what's happening in the country and the world as a whole.
My favorite social network is Twitter. I like Twitter because I do follow various news sites there, and I get the links to their news articles that I read every single day. And all in all, my primary source of news is newspaper articles. It's like when you subscribe to your traditional newspapers, but online. And in addition to that, I do watch the news on television every single day, just before I go to work. And I listen to radio on my way to work and from work and at work. So basically, I can just say over and above that, my favorite news source is radio, because I get to listen to the news in an instant.
Basically, I prefer using social networks for information. Social networks such as Facebook, Twitter, and WhatsApp. Other than that, I also do listen to radio as well as watch television. But I also do employ the use of apps such as News24, which is great because it have different subdivisions such as Health 24, W24, Parents 24, Food 24, Sports, which are great for my show. But other than that, I also use the SABC app because it also covers local stories. So those are the things that I use to get information.
So how I consume information or news, because of how the world is constantly changing and how information is now easily accessible, I still rely on television and radio to consume a lot of news. So every single morning when I wake up, I do switch on my radio or television to get the latest on what's happening around the country, because I feel it's really, really important to be well informed as to what's happening around you, because the world is really constantly changing. I avoid using a lot of social media or the internet to get my information because it spreads a lot of fake news, but I do go in sometimes to reliable sources to get the information that I need.
All right, so there you have it, a wide range of views there, but I think they're sort of starting to come towards a central point, and it's social media has influenced them quite a bit, but traditional media also still being consumed. Gentlemen, let me start with you, Siyabonga. Did that surprise you in any way, or was this what you suspected?
Not at all. I was not surprised at all. I would say, I think it would differ with the type of place that a young person is based. I don't necessarily think someone from Kwanongom or someone from Vuan, someone from Lusikisiki would actually consume, I would say, more than 50% of the news from social media because of a simple thing, data. Data is very expensive, so they rely more on radio. But I'm in a position whereby I'm like, also I think where the traditional media, which is TV and radio, especially radio, it's kind of letting down a lot of young people because you would hear almost the same bulletin for like 2 hours.
Right.
And like say, there will be developments, but it's mainly the same stories, same way of writing, no different angles. So I think those who live in urban areas, like in urban areas, Johannesburg, I think those have stand a great chance of getting news from different platforms, TV, newspapers, social media. But those from the rural areas, informal settlements, those are in a very difficult situation because if there's no newspaper close by, there's no data, then the radio repeats the same bulletins.
So there are challenges, but are young people wanting to listen to news? I'll come to you just now.
I think they do. But let's be honest, if you switch on your TV or radio now, it starts everything now, like I would say 2 stories would top politics. And the young people that I've come across are really, really tired of this back and forth in in parliament, in different political parties, So those I've spoken to, the moment they hear President this political party, they're already tired because they know it's just a game. So they're specific on actually what they want.
Madlakosi, I'm quite interested in your story because you write for a community newspaper.
Yes.
Are young people picking that up as well? Or is this kind of, I don't know, is it a family experience or is it the adults, the older people in the families that are the major consumers of your community paper?
I may say adults are the ones who consume the paper more often because with our youth lately, they are no longer into newspapers. If I may say, a majority of the youth now own cell phone. They are on Twitter, and Twitter keeps on updating on current events each and every hour, if not each and every minute. We have social media platforms such as SABC on Twitter, whereby they update stories online. So I may say our youth consume stories through social media.
So it's electronic now.
Yeah.
My only worry again is what do you do with the long-form journalism, in-depth storytelling that gives you more background? Because what happens in the short story format, it's just he crossed the road and he got run over by a car, but we don't really get into what happened before.
Yes.
Is it a problem on that road all the time? There's bigger stories around it. Are they not interested in those stories?
It's not to say they are not interested. One thing that you should remember is that our newspapers now, they also have online platforms. So our youth can also access those stories online. So,
okay. All right. So I'm head of news, SABC, for example. What would I be doing if I wanted to attract young viewers?
I think it's more of bringing conversations that would involve young people in talking, to have their own views about certain matters. I mean, in South Africa, we have a lot of issues. So I think when we have a particular story in that was, let's say, published by a certain newspaper, if it tops the list of the stories that were published in that week, I think we should have a program that would bring young people and have young people talking about it, so that it's easy for them to relate to the story, to understand how it affects them, because the population is the majority is young people. And most of the issues that we have in the country are affecting young people, but most young people are not aware of how these things affect them. So to bring a program that would make sure that young people are included in those conversations would actually help, as you said, if you were the head of SABC News, into understanding what they want.
Or is there a time that you watch? Because, you know, traditionally prime time is sort of early evening, but I think that's starting to shift with digital platforms. But young people, do you wake up to watch morning news, for example, or do you rush home to catch the 7 o'clock news? Or is news kind of an experience throughout the day and you pick up when you feel like it?
For me, Peter, I'd say radio is the most platform which is suitable, simply because I can listen to radio whilst I'm on my way to campus or when I'm on my way back. So radio would do it. I mean, as for newspaper, we find those guys selling newspapers in the morning, but then I cannot find those guys later in the day. So radio would do it for me.
Right. Do you see young people with newspapers in their hands?
I hardly do.
Yeah.
No, I hardly do. I think those I've seen with newspapers are those who are looking for employment.
Right.
I think those are the only people that I've come across, young people who are reading newspapers because they're always at the back of the page looking for employment. But apart from that, not really.
So, I mean, what that does mean then, if this country is mostly young people, is that we have to think as an industry about not bothering with newspapers in the future. Are we saying that?
I cannot say that because we still have our elders whom rely on newspapers.
But
our
we're dying off.
I know that our elders are slowly coming to an end. But then again, some of our elders suffer in terms of using smartphones. So they still rely on newspapers. So we kind of have to have a balance in between the two.
Your work on radio, how much is it affected by social media?
A lot, I'd say. Working for a community, or I'll say campus, a community radio station based on a campus, is that obviously we don't have much resources. So most of the content that we generate, we rely more on social media and like the SABC News and other news agencies. So sometimes we are limited. But we try by all means to make sure that we get news that would speak directly to the type of the audience, the target audience that we have.
All right. So I'm hoping that we can get back to a time where some of the stories that the media outlets generate are the ones that become the topic of discussion on social media instead of the other way around. Do you think we're starting to lose that, where media leads the news agenda, that now the news agenda is being led by social media?
I totally agree with that, Peter. Simply because we have our media influencers, and some of those people would be tweeting on anything that's trending there, and they put on a trend whereby our youth would follow on the trend. So I totally agree that the media is now leading the news.
It is quite scary, this influencer thing, isn't it? Because you've got some people with 1 million followers, and whatever interests them can be the news of the day.
I think with that we should be very careful with following whatever the influencers are tweeting or posting on either on Twitter or on Facebook, because sometimes they can get it wrong. So there are ways of fact checking, especially with photos. You know, during the xenophobic attacks that we had last year, people were tweeting saying in Nigeria, South Africans are being beaten up, or which is wrong. Actually, they show old videos. So there's a way of actually reversing those images and videos just to check when they were published and what were the articles.
But young people, we don't have time for that, right?
Well, I think it's a culture that we need to teach, if I may put it like that. That it's very important to fact check whatever you're posting or tweeting, because if I have 1,000 followers, and then there's like misinformation on my Twitter timeline, then that becomes a problem to the 1,000 people and their followers as well, because they'll see that and keep on retweeting, and and then it becomes chaotic. And people, there are times whereby when you read on Twitter, when you're reading certain things on Twitter, you're like, the world is coming to an end. because
All right.
of the
So
the
here's a
misinformation.
curious thing, and I just want an answer from both of you. So there's a 24-hour news channel that started recently, and they had a program in the morning, a morning sort of kind of newsy program. But what they did was they made it very young, very hip, and purposely targeted the youth. Sadly, I noticed that that program's not on air anymore, and I suspect it's because the audience wasn't there. And I just wonder what could have gone wrong. Are young people not waking up to watch early morning news programs, or what could it have been?
For me, it would have to do with the type of person that you put in a particular program. I think there's audience for any type of program that you'd want to have on TV or on radio. But certainly, you have to be critical when you appoint or when you employ the people that you want to host that particular show. I don't think we should employ people based on their followers. I think we should employ people based on their passion, their qualification, and also their capabilities. I don't think necessarily they were capable enough to give us that morning news thing.
All right, so with your thoughts, I guess it's quite an important point you make that, having 1 million followers on social media doesn't mean I'm going to follow you to TV or to radio. Your thoughts?
I may say with regards to media is all about viewership. So if viewership is less, then I mean, they have no choice but to remove the show on television.
All right. Okay, gents, thanks so much indeed. We're going to carry on chatting just now when we look at the newspapers, but now we've got a feature which I find interesting where we go back in history, and one of the reasons we've done this is because young people like you were not there at that time. And this is a moment for us to go back into our archives, into years gone by. And today we go back to 1997, when a group of former security policemen admitted to a range of crimes, including the killing of Black consciousness leader Steve Biko. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission confirmed newspaper reports that these former police officers had made a formal amnesty application. Let's take a look at how the SABC covered the story that day.
It's 20 years on, and the truth about the death of Steve Biko has finally emerged. A group of former security policemen has admitted to a range of crimes, which includes the killing of Mr. Biko, Matthew Ganiwe and the PEBCO 3. The policemen have applied to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for amnesty.
The TRC's unprecedented news conference in Port Elizabeth today followed leaks to the media about the amnesty applications by the former policemen. The Commission's investigating unit head, Dumisa Nsebeza, declined to name the applicants but outlined some of the crimes they've confessed to. The list of anti-apartheid activists killed includes Steve Biko, the PEBCO 3, Matthew Ganiwe and his 3 companions.
Amnesty applications have been filed by a number of former security policemen who have indicated that they are applying for amnesty in respect of charges of assault and culpable homicide.
The lawyer representing some of the applicants, Francois van der Merwe, disclosed that 5 of his clients had applied for amnesty for Mr. Biko's killing, while the activist was being held in police custody. Colonel Harold Snyman is a former regional security police head. Colonel Gideon Nivert is a convicted murderer out on bail pending an appeal. He's implicated in several killings. The others are Brigadier Dankie Sibbert and warrant officers Ruben Marks and J.J. Bieneker. Major General Nick van Rensburg has admitted to being involved in the murders of the Ganiwe 4, of Sofiwe Mtumskulu, Topsy Madaka and the PEBCO 3. The PEBCO 3, Mr. Mtunkulu and Mr. Madaka were all tortured and killed at a disused police station near Craddock.
There, after interrogation, the 3 were apparently given coffee with sleeping tablets in it. Each was allegedly shot by a different applicant. Then the bodies were placed on a pyre and burnt. This took 4 to 6 hours. The remains were placed in plastic bags and disposed of in the Fish River.
Mr. Biko's widow, Nsiki, who has criticized the TRC before, declined to comment on the revelations. But family members of other victims were present today and willing to talk.
I want them to come all out with the whole information and explain to us why did they do that to our husband, who have instructed them. Then I think I'll be more happier.
Former political exile Donald Woods, a friend of Mr. Biko, also welcomed the news.
Let's find out now the truth. And there's other interesting things, to come out, because we've got to find out how full the confession will be. Are they going to implicate other people? Are they going to tell us exactly who hit, how many of them hit him? Because we know he died of blows to the head.
Mr. van der Merwe said his client had applied for amnesty long before the first cut-off date. The Commission stressed that the investigations into these matters are far from over. Once the investigations progress, many more security policemen are expected to be implicated. Mike Proctor-Sims, SABC, Port Elizabeth.
Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. We're starting to wrap things up now, but at this point, this is where we start taking a look a little bit closer to some of the stories in the Sunday newspapers. And let's start with you, Siyabonga. Which paper grabbed your attention and what story?
So it was the Sunday Independent story that says challenges in municipalities. I mean, that's an old, I don't want to say it's an old story, but that's an old thing that's happening in South Africa, where most of, especially local government municipalities, they're really facing challenges when it comes to the managing of money, service delivery, and they're the ones mostly where service delivery protest starts from. So,
is this something that's going to affect your vote in the local government elections next year?
Yeah. Well, I think I can't mention any at the moment, but I'll keep on observing because, I mean, there's still time.
Yeah. Okay. What about you? Which paper?
It's Sunday Times.
Yeah.
The story of Enoch Mpianzi.
Right.
I mean, there have been instances about 5 children have died, including Enoch Mpianzi, but then the government only took steps now to change the system to say schools should check with the government before going to camps. Then, I mean, the issue of the boats, the boats. I mean, that was reckless according to me. And again, the institution not having life support jackets. That on its own. How do you have children going in the water without having life jackets? So I think
it's a bit. What is sad, unfortunately, is that a lot of these stories are not new. But something about social media has made things different now, so that people in the past, shame they cried on their own, but now it seems at least these stories get out. But there's probably a lot more to that story. But what about, and I want to talk about the other one, public protector. Is this something that worries you guys?
I feel when I heard about that Parliament has agreed actually to review or to look at the public protector's role, and now seeing this article on the front page of the Sunday Independent that she's been investigated for her taxes, it raises a lot of questions about the revelations that we saw last year. When it comes to President Cyril Ramaphosa and also Pravin Gordhan, So now it's like, what was happening then? It was the public protector's words against the presidency, and now she's being investigated, and now there are calls for her to resign. So you ask yourself, there's quite a lot that's happening around that.
Yeah. All right, let's go back to the Sunday Times, because on the front page there is an interesting story. I think we can bring it up. The Sunday Times, ANC in land U-turn shock. Now, what they're trying to do, apparently, according to this, is to tweak the constitution a little bit and take the courts out of the equation. Now, I don't know whether we can trust politicians to be left to make decisions on their own accord. What are your thoughts?
I think we cannot trust politicians, because we've had politicians deciding for our communities and everyone abroad. So I think the court is the best way, simply because we have a lot of representation, not simply a single person like the minister in this case. So
is that a concern for you?
It is a concern, because if you think about courts, when a Chapter 9 institution rules on something, and then the parliament does not, act on it. Remember when they said former President Jacob Zuma acted, he broke his oath of office. Yeah. But they didn't do it. Parliament didn't do anything about him. So now you ask yourself, if the land issue were to be under the Department of Land Reform Department, you ask yourself what's going to happen there, because now, which means the courts are just out of this equation. No matter what they say, that particular department will still challenge them.
All right, gents, unfortunately we've run out of time and it goes by quite quickly, but I know this was your debut on TV. You guys were both fantastic, and I look forward to seeing you guys on TV in the future as journalists, perhaps even here at the SABC, but you were fabulous. Thanks so much. Siyabonga Muto and Mandlakosi Ubisi. Thanks very much indeed, gentlemen. All right, and for you at home, thanks very much for watching Media Monitor this week. Join us again next week at the same time. Have a lovely week in between. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.